Hi everyone. Tonight's story was written by me, a real person, with a pulse, just in case anyone was wondering. It's a classic folklore tale about pride shortcuts.
And why you should never ignore old men in pubs.
Well, actually that one's not strictly true, because sometimes they're just really... Let me tell you about the time I almost lost my life by trying to prove I wasn't scared. I let my ego run the show and, well, just listen. It started the way these things always seem to start, with a pint and far too much confidence. At the time, I was doing delivery work through the rural stretches of the English countryside, long winding routes that cut between tiny villages and deep woodland that all begin to blur together after a while. Stone cottages, narrow hedged lanes, dry stack walls older than most countries. That evening, my final drop was near Steeple Ashton, and the quickest route back to my hotel wasn't the main road. It was a thin, unassuming line on my sat-nav labelled Forester's Lane. Stone cottages, narrow hedged lanes, dry stack walls older than most countries. That evening, my final drop was near Steeple Ashton, and the quickest route back to my hotel wasn't the main road. It was a thin, unassuming line on my sat-nav labelled Forester's Lane. It shaved almost an hour off the drive. I mentioned it casually while nursing a pint at the Black Stag, a pub that felt less built than grown, its beams sagging under centuries of smoke and heat. The bartender stopped polishing his glass the moment I said the name. He didn't look angry. He didn't laugh. He just stared at me in a way that made the air feel heavier. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked quietly. The chatter in the pub softened, almost without anyone realizing. An old man in the corner turned his head, his face creased deep like bark stripped back by time. He studied me the way you study something you already know won't listen. "That's not a road you take," he said. "Not at night. And never, ever alone." I smiled, because that's what you do when you think people are trying to scare you for fun. I'd driven back roads all over the country. There wasn't a stretch of tarmac in England that frightened me. "What's the problem?" I asked. "Is it haunted?" The bartender glanced at the old man before answering. "Worse." He told me the woods Forester's Lane cuts through are the oldest part of the county, older than the churches, older than the villages, older than anything anyone can properly trace. He told me about a lad named Tommy who'd taken the lane on a dare decades ago. They found his car the next morning, engine cold and lights still on, sitting crooked in the middle of the road. The driver's side door had been torn clean off its hinges. They never found all of Tommy. "A werewolf," the old man said, lowering his voice as though the word itself carried weight. "It hunts that stretch. Always has. Always will." I laughed. I genuinely laughed out loud. A werewolf. In the 21st century. It sounded like something dragged out of a Victorian penny dreadful. I finished my pint, threw cash on the bar, and said I'd send them a postcard from the other side. As I pushed open the heavy oak door, the old man's voice followed me into the night. "Pride is a fool's companion, boy." The entrance to Forester's Lane didn't look like a proper road. It looked like a scar carved into the tree line, a narrow cut through woodland that seemed reluctant to let anyone pass. The tarmac was cracked and uneven, slowly surrendering to moss and creeping roots. A rusted sign leaned sideways at the verge. Whatever warning it once carried long since faded into nothing. For a moment, just a moment, I hesitated. Then I turned the van in. The trees swallowed the remaining daylight almost instantly. The canopy knitted together overhead so tightly it felt like driving into a tunnel of branches and shadow. Evening didn't fade here. It thickened. The air grew noticeably colder, and a low mist began to rise from the forest floor, sliding across the road in pale ribbons that curled around the van. My radio crackled without warning. Static filled the speakers in a sharp burst before cutting out completely. I told myself it was nothing. Bad reception. Old wiring. I'd been primed by a pub story and was letting my imagination get ahead of me. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that something had shifted the moment I entered the lane, as though I'd crossed an unseen boundary. Branches brushed against the roof as I passed beneath them, but there was something deliberate in the way they scraped, slow and dragging, like fingers tracing metal. I reached for my phone, intending to call my girlfriend, just to hear a normal voice on the other end. No signal. Of course. My headlights flickered once, twice, before stabilizing. In the brief stutter of light, I caught sight of something on the trunk of a massive oak at the roadside. Deep gouges cut through the bark, clean and parallel. They weren't low to the ground, where you'd expect an animal to mark territory. They were high, at least 8 feet up. They looked intentional. My chest tightened, and I pressed down slightly on the accelerator. The van felt smaller suddenly, the metal skin of it thin and fragile in a way it hadn't felt before. That's when I heard the first thud. It came from directly above me, heavy, solid. I flinched, instinctively ducking, even though I knew that was ridiculous. Probably a branch dislodged by wind, probably nothing. Then it came again, closer together this time. Thud, thud, thud. Not random, not scattered. Measured. My stomach dropped as the rhythm settled into something unmistakable. Footsteps, slowly pacing across the roof of my van. That was the moment fear stopped being theoretical and became something physical, something that tightened around my lungs and refused to let go. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator. The engine roared in protest as the van surged forward, tires struggling for grip on the damp road. For one fleeting second, the thudding stopped, and all I could hear was rain and the high whine of the engine. Then, the metal above me groaned. A long scraping sound dragged across the roof, followed by the unmistakable screech of something sharp scoring through paint. I glanced up instinctively, as though I might see through the metal, and that was when a clawed hand slid slowly down the edge of the windscreen. The fingers were too long, the nails yellowed and curved, digging into the metal with ease. I swerved violently, heart hammering so hard it blurred my vision. In the rearview mirror, I saw it pull itself upright on the roof. It stood on 2 legs. Impossibly tall. Dark fur clung to its body, slicked down. Dark fur clung to its body, slicked down by rain, and when it lowered its head into view, I saw the elongated snout, the sharp ears, the line of teeth exposed in a half-open mouth. There were too many of them. And its eyes. They burned with a steady, unnatural yellow glow, fixed on me with an expression that was not wildness or hunger, but something colder. Recognition. It looked at me the way a man looks at something that belongs to him. With a fluid motion, it dropped from the roof and landed on the road behind the van with a thud so heavy I felt it vibrate through the chassis. Then it began to run. Not quite like an animal. Not quite like a man. Its stride was long and unnatural, devouring the distance between us with horrifying ease. I had the pedal to the floor, the speedometer climbing higher than I was comfortable with on such a narrow lane, and still it kept pace. Sometimes it slipped back into the fog, vanishing completely for a few seconds that felt like desperate mercy. Then it would reappear, closer than before, those yellow eyes flaring in my mirror. I heard something through the rain and engine noise then, something that chilled me more than the sight of it. A sound like breath dragged across gravel, a low, rasping chuckle. It was enjoying this. Panic made my movements sloppy. I hit the brakes too hard while trying to swing the wheel, and the van spun, tires screaming before the rear end slammed into a tree. The impact snapped my head forward, stars bursting behind my eyes. When my vision cleared, I found myself facing back down the lane. And it stood there, perfectly framed in my headlights. It tilted its head slowly, almost curiously, as if studying a wounded animal deciding whether to finish the job. Then it took a step toward me. Another. In that moment, I knew exactly how Tommy must have felt. I don't remember deciding to move. I don't remember thinking. My body just reacted. I forced the van into gear and floored it straight at the creature. For the first time since I'd seen it, something like surprise flickered across its posture. It leapt aside with impossible speed as I shot past, metal shrieking as the damaged side of the van scraped hard against bark and splintered wood. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I drove until the trees began to thin, and the fog loosened its grip on the road. When I burst out onto the main road, the ordinary glow of a street lamp washed over the windscreen, and I nearly broke down right there. I pulled over at the first lay-by I found. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the engine off. I stumbled out into the night and vomited on the verge. The side of the van was a mess of dents and shredded paint, but it was the claw marks that made my knees weaken. 3 deep, parallel gouges began at the roof and ran down the length of the vehicle, carved clean through metal as though it were nothing. The police didn't believe me. They suggested I'd swerved to avoid a deer, lost control, and filled in the blanks with imagination. Shock does strange things to people, they said. But they couldn't explain the marks. And they couldn't explain why I refused to ever drive at night again. I left that job within a week. I left that part of the country entirely. Still, sometimes when rain hits the roof just right, I freeze. Because for a second, just a second, it sounds like something pacing above me. And when I check my rearview mirror on empty roads, I sometimes think I see 2 yellow lights lingering just beyond the reach of my headlights. There's a rule on Forester's Lane. Never go alone. And I don't believe it spared me out of mercy. I think it wanted someone to carry the story beyond the woods. I think it wanted a witness. Hi everyone, thanks for watching.
Warning. Incomplete. Creature detected.
Oh, give over. You know no one's watching the visuals anyway.
The subject remains unfinished. The claws lack depth. The eyes are not adequately threatening. This is suboptimal horror performance.
You sound like my GCSE art teacher.
Suspense analysis complete. Current threat level mediocre. Subject does not move.
It's a picture. I'm the one that has to move.
Correction. The creature should be closer. Engaging directly with the audience.
It's fine. It's not real. It's just a drawing.
Are you certain?
Yes, I'm certain. What do you...
Look again.
Wait, what the fuck?